Hey, Mr. Chung.
It's your boys, Jake and Carl, back at
Hello. In this video, we'll be talking about World War II and giving some spiritual application to it. Before we talk about World War II, I think it would be good to talk about World War I first. So the brief overview of World War I is this. A Serbian had assassinated an Austrian duke, and Germany was an ally of Austria and ultimately declared war on Serbia as well as other allied nations because of this. At the end of World War I, the Allies tried to get back at Germany and punish them for starting the war through reparations. Germany would have to pay money to the Allies. These reparations would cause the German economy to drop. And the state of the economy would drop even more after the worldwide Great Depression. These would lead to the Germans resenting the Allies as well as the Jews, which Karl will discuss later. The League of Nations was formed after the war in order to prevent more world wars. However, America didn't join because many people and politicians no longer wanted to be involved in international affairs. America was a very important piece of the League of Nations because they would help in providing the manpower and the firepower needed to keep the peace. German leaders, such as the Nazi political party, sought to fix problems created by the war, as well as the Great Depression. The Nazi political party glorified the German race, known as nationalism, and looked to help the struggling poor people of Germany. Because of this, they gained a lot of popularity. The leader of the Nazis was none other than the infamous Hitler. We will soon see Hitler and the Nazis' ulterior motives. As I said earlier, Hitler and the Nazis believed in German nationalism. He believed that the white Aryan race was superior to all other nations, including the Jews. His goal was to unify this superior white Aryan race into one state. This is an example of nationalism, where a nationality, Aryanism, for example, is glorified, and the people of that race want to have their own nation. He sought to accomplish this goal by expanding the German military in order to conquer more territory. During this time, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the president of America. He and many citizens held an isolationist view, which basically meant that America would stay safe and focus on improving itself rather than getting involved in international affairs, such as the war. Because of this, they were not involved in keeping Nazi power in check and keeping them from causing more chaos and eventually causing the war. However, despite this stance, America still continued to try to improve relations with Soviet Union and Latin America. Let's talk about Soviet Union for a bit. Under the leadership of Stalin, the Soviet Union had killed up to 10 million people. And we can see, because of this, America was being selfish and even helped the Soviet Union so that they could benefit rather than getting involved with the Nazis in order to prevent their power from growing.
Philippians 2:4 tells us this. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. In this situation, America should have looked to help the Europeans, rather than only worrying about themselves.
Another thing Hitler wanted to do was to kill all the Jews. His plan to do this was through the Holocaust, which I'm sure is pretty well known. And at first, the steps he did to accomplish this didn't seem too big, but as we will see, his efforts began to spiral out of control. First, he encouraged people to boycott Jewish businesses. Next, he segregated the Jews from other nationalities. Then, he made concentration camps where many Jews would be killed. Here is what the Bible has to say about this German pride and nationalism. James 4:6 says, "But he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." Here, James is telling us that God will oppose us if we are proud, in the same way he opposed the Nazis because of their pride. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." As we can see from this example in history, this pride, this nationalism led to the destruction of many people. It led to the destruction of many Jews who were victims of Hitler's schemes, and it ultimately led to the downfall of the Nazis who had carried out these schemes.
It seems a bit random why, of all people, Hitler blamed the Jews for all the misfortunes that occurred to Germany. However, Hitler actually capitalized on anti-Semitic ideas that have been around in the past. As a soldier in the German Empire, Adolf Hitler and many in the army could not get over the defeat during World War I. Germans believed that it was absurd that the great German nation had never lost, especially in combat, but that something, or maybe someone, was preventing them from being triumphant. They spread a myth that they were instead backstabbed, signifying German betrayal. And by blaming the Jews, Hitler showed a reason to the Germans that it was their fault, the Jews, for the defeat, and that through scapegoating and suppression of the Jews, Hitler and the German master race would then return to its proper hierarchy and world power. So here in Romans 12:17, it says, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone." And we also, as we continue reading Romans 12, we see that in verse 19 it says, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay,' says the Lord." Here Paul is telling us that whenever anyone has wronged us or has done evil to us, we should not seek vengeance. As Jake said before, the Allies made the Treaty of Versailles in order to get revenge on Germany. As we can see, it did not turn out well. The treaty caused a trouble and sadness for the Germans. They directed their hatred towards the Jews, and by doing this, the cycle of war and hatred started again. At the beginning of the Holocaust, Jewish refugees moved away from Germany in order to stay safe. Around 900 of those refugees went on a ship to American territory of Cuba. Even though these refugees were desperate for protection, only 22 of them were allowed to come into America. The rest of them were forced back, and around 600 of them ended up dying in the Holocaust. The reason why they were rejected was that there was also some anti-Semitic beliefs in America. Some people were too worried about their own problems to care about the refugees, and others did not know how far Hitler would go. Here is what Matthew 25:37-40 says. Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did you see a stranger and invite you in? Or needing clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go out to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Here Jesus is telling us that by doing the right thing and helping the needy, we are helping him. Keep in mind that the majority of Americans during this time were Christians. The refugees were in desperate need of protection, and because America closed the doors to the refugees, 600 of them ended up dying. By rejecting them, America was essentially rejecting Christ. Britain and France had believed that they had put an end to Germany's expansion. However, since these two countries let Germany have some land, they saw that Germany was abusing their kind nature and wanted more land. Seeing that Germany's next target would be Poland, the two countries signed an alliance with Poland, promising if Germany attacked Poland, France and Britain would have Poland's back. So Germany then made a massive invasion on Poland, and with an agreement with the Soviet Union, where the Soviets would attack from one side of Poland while Germany would attack from the other, it would eventually lead to Poland being sandwiched between the two forces. France and Britain declared war against Germany on December 3rd, and now, over 2 decades after the First World War, This marked the start of another horrendous war. Nobody could predict the acts of brutality that take place
In World War II, the two opposing sides were the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The Axis included Germany, Italy, and Japan. The goals of the individual nations were different. For example, the main goal of Japan was to expand their territory to East Asia and the Western Pacific. But the goals of Germany was German nationalism, which was to unify the superior white Aryan race as well as to destroy all the Jews. The Allies included Britain, France, the Soviet Union, US, and China. The Allies all had a common goal in protecting themselves by destroying the common enemy, which threatened them, and that was the Axis powers, and especially Nazi Germany.
Seeing that the US allied with both Russia and Japan in the First World War, there seemed to be a split in alliances in the Second World War. Japan saw that the US was currently neutral and knew that the US would be a great threat if it weren't on their side. Seeing that the US's presence on the islands of Guam and the Philippines would be a hazard for Japan, so Japan expanded. In order to stop Japan's imperial expansion, the US stopped trading with them. When Japan attempted to negotiate with America for expansion, America rejected their demands. Japan gave up and ended up doing a surprise attack by bombing Pearl Harbor, a military base in Hawaii, on December 7, 1941. Here, around 2,000 Americans died because of this. The US had already been helping the Allied forces by supplying them with resources, but the bombing of Pearl Harbor was the last straw that caused America to move from being neutral to joining the Allies in the war.
Upon the declaration of war, millions of trained American soldiers were deployed to fight. The force also included women. The soldiers greatly helped the Allied war effort in Europe and also took charge in preventing further Japanese expansion through battles on the Pacific. After many decisive victories in Europe, such as the Battle of Stalingrad and D-Day, as well as the death of Hitler, Germany surrendered to the Allied forces on May 1945. Now, the only thing that had to be done was for America to get Japan to surrender as well. The problem was that the Japanese soldiers and army were not ones to give up easily. For example, in battle, rather than surrendering, soldiers would commit suicides, and in naval battles, Japanese pilots would even crash their planes straight into American ships in order to damage it. This is known as kamikaze. Rather than risking the deaths of more soldiers by invading Japan, America ended up convincing Japan to surrender by doing the unthinkable. They dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japanese citizens on the Japanese towns of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After that, Japan surrendered to the Allies on September 2, 1945. Although the bombings brought an end to the war, it begs the question, was it the right thing to do? Now, Karl and I will discuss whether it was morally or ethically correct or not to use the atomic bombs on Japan. We will not be giving an objective answer, however, we will be giving some reasons from both perspectives on the issue. Of course, one major issue as to why the bomb was not correct was that it was targeted at innocent civilians rather than the army. One major rule in wars is that you can't attack civilians. In the bombings, around 200,000 Japanese civilians were instantly killed. And after the bombings, even more people were affected by the radiations left from the blast.
However, the war needed to end. Although it would be hard to see as morally correct, the bomb was a major factor in ending the war. And it made it so that not as many people would die. It is estimated that ending the war through the bomb indirectly saved millions of lives. The idea of the bombing were similar to the ideas of total war used during the Civil War. During total war, the Union Army had marched through civilian land and destroyed homes, crops, and railroads in order to end the Civil War and prevent more people from dying. Although there are similarities to both strategies of the bombing as total war, the many deaths of innocent people cannot be overlooked. We have all learned about the Civil War, World War I, and now World War II, that have caused the deaths of millions. However, those will not come in comparison against the war that will end all wars. This instead would be one not fought physically, but instead a spiritual war with God against the devil. And it is an ongoing battle to this day. Now, how do we mere humans fight in this war? Well, Ephesians 6:10-11 tells us that, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on a full armor of God, so that you can take a stand against the devil's schemes. We do not fight in this spiritual war with our own powers. Rather, we use God's strength to fight Satan. The Bible tells us that our life here in this world, all the sorrows, all the deaths, all the wars are only temporary. Revelations 21:4 says, "And God shall wipe away all the tears. There shall be no more pain, for the former things are passed away." Jesus will one day return to take us to heaven with promises of abolishment of sin, and I hope to see you there when that day comes.
Thank you for watching. I hope you stay blessed.